Well, as the rebels try and cement control in Syria, what will a transitional government look like, and what are the first things that a new administration will need to do? H.A. Hellyer is a Senior Associate Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute, and he joins me now from Cairo. H.A. Hellyer, good to have you with us. Now, Abu Muhammad al-Julani, in his most recent interview with US television, he said that no one has the right to erase another group and that these sects have coexisted for hundreds of years. I'm taking it that he refers to Sunnis, Shiites and Alawites and others, and that there must be a legal framework to protect them all. So can Syrian minorities take his word?
So first, Nirish, thank you very much. Pleasure to be on your program. I think that at this particular moment in Syrian history, two things are called for. One is to allow the luxury of hope. This is the end of many decades of what was certainly the most brutal authoritarian regime in the Arab world during my lifetime. And I think that people ought to recognize that and allow for that luxury of hope, which is why we're seeing all of these scenes of exhilaration from ordinary Syrians in Syria and outside of it. And I think we need to center that. The second is a note of caution, which is we don't know what happens next. Of course, there's been a lot of trauma over the past few decades, and we're going to be looking at a nation going through PTSD, right? And one of those issues, a very important one of the most important one of those issues, is how minority relations are going to engage in Syria. Of course, there's a Sunni majority, but with a sizable non-Sunni minority made up of many different groups: Christians, Twelver Shia, Ismailis, Alawites, Druze. So there's quite and other groups as well. I mean, Syria is a very pluralistic nation, and I don't think anybody should just cast that to one side in terms of the concerns. And I think that this ought to be raised as a point of concern. But ultimately, it will be down to the Syrians themselves to figure out how to manage that sort of complexity, that sort of pluralism, and I hope that they do well.
If, as you say, it is down to Syrians, would they be expecting that at some point this next year or the year after that there would be free and fair elections?
So I'm not sure what the transition plan is in that regard, but I would also issue a note of caution. In other transitional periods, not just in the Arab world, but in other parts of the world, when you came out of dictatorship or authoritarianism, I think the most durable results came from a medium to, I won't say long term, but not a very quick transitional process before elections, because there had to be certain safeguards that were put in place. Because again, this is a trauma. It's a national trauma that people are coming out of. Okay, and we've seen in other situations that before you go to the ballot box, where of course different things will take priority, you need to establish certain safeguards. And arrange things on the ground properly so that what happens next isn't chaotic. Because remember, elections are not the end result. The end result is a system where elections can happen again and again and again in the most free and fair environment possible. So there will be an experiment that begins now. And the important thing in the interim will be to ensure that the experiment is durable and is sustained, as opposed to rushing it so that it just collapses. So yes, of course, elections are incredibly important. What will be most important will be to ensure that the elections will then be repeated again and again.
Yes, so in this experiment that you are talking about and this transitional phase that Syria is at right this minute, what are the first things perhaps this group has to do first? Because we are seeing pictures of so many people queuing up for food and gas in many parts. And of course, we're seeing thousands of prisoners being released from prison. So what are the first things you think, that Jolani has to do?
Well, I think that he's already doing it, but I also don't think it will be him alone that does it. I want your viewers to understand this. HTS is not running all parts of the show here. HTS moved over the past week in coordination with other groups on the ground. And then on top of that, many who were not affiliated to groups at all came out and joined. And also, you're going to have hundreds of thousands, if not more, return to Syria because I don't think the people. I hope people in Australia don't need to hear this, but refugees don't want to be refugees. They don't want to be refugees. They want to live in security, in dignity, and in honor. So I think you'll see many Syrians try to go back to Syria right now. And then they will also be another part of the puzzle that the new authorities are going to have to contend with. And I think that's good. I think that what you've seen from HTS, where it's been in a position of authority thus far, is that, it's not just conservative, but very autocratic, and in some ways authoritarian, although not comparable to the Assad regime. But they were quite pragmatic because they knew that pragmatism meant that they could hold on and that they could actually sustain themselves in the areas that they took over. Well, they're going to have to be even more pragmatic now in order to avoid huge amounts of public dissent against them. And I suspect that will be the instinct that they follow, but we'll have to wait and see. A note of caution, I think, is very good here, and I'm glad that you raise it, but it shouldn't override the hope and the notes of optimism for the potentials and possibilities for the future.
Yes, a long road ahead, but there is work, as you've just mentioned, going on to return Syria to a semblance of stability. But of course, elsewhere, we are seeing this battle playing out in north of Syria between the Kurds, backed by the US, and the Syrian National Army, supported by Turkey. Can we expect al-Jolani to deal with that situation right there?
Again, I don't know. And by the way, I'm going to say I don't know to quite a few questions and I think that people really should be very careful about being too deterministic and certain about how things are going to play out now. The only thing that is certain for me is that any sustainable stability for Syria could not take place with Bashar al-Assad at the helm. That he had to go in order for there to be potential to build something better. So I hope that the new authorities in Syria do not squander the opportunity that they have been given. And I hope that when it comes to the Kurds, that there will be constructive discussions around how to ensure that Syria remains a sovereign unitary state, even if there are arrangements around autonomy and so forth. But those will be Syrian problems to resolve, and it should be Syrians that resolve them themselves.
Okay, H.A. Hellyer in Cairo, thanks very much for your insights. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.